Reggie White, the Minister of Defense. Who was the most dominant defensive player in NFL history? Maybe you think of Lawrence Taylor, who changed the game, or Joe Green, who anchored a dynasty. But when it comes to pure pass-rushing dominance, combined with run-stopping power, nobody did it better than Reggie White. 198 career sacks, 13 Pro Bowls, 13 All-Pro selections, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, a Super Bowl ring. And here's the wildest part. He was an ordained minister who almost quit football entirely to preach full-time. So here is why there will never be another Reggie White. So how does a kid from Chattanooga, Tennessee, become the most feared pass rusher in football history while also becoming a man of God? Reggie White's story is about to show you that greatness comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful force on the football field is also the most humble off it. Reggie White grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, raised by his mother Thelma and his grandmother after his parents separated when he was young. Life wasn't easy, but the women in his life taught him discipline, hard work, and faith. And that faith would become just as important to his story as anything he ever did on a football field. At Howard High School in Chattanooga, White became an absolute force on the defensive line. He wasn't just good, he was unblockable. Offensive coordinators would design entire game plans around trying to slow him down, and they'd still fail. But something else happened during those high school years that would define the rest of his life. At just 12 years old, White felt called to the ministry. By 17, he was ordained as a Baptist minister. Think about that for a second. Most 17-year-olds are worried about their next math test or who they're taking to prom. Reggie White was preaching sermons and dominating on Friday nights. He wrestled with the decision between football and ministry, but eventually he realized something important. He didn't have to choose. He could do both. So when the University of Tennessee came calling, White headed to Knoxville with a plan to get his education, develop his football skills, and continue preaching on Sundays. And at Tennessee, White became a legend. As a freshman in 1980, he made an immediate impact. Then, as a sophomore in 1981, he absolutely exploded onto the national scene. White recorded 15 sacks that season, setting an SEC record and announcing to the entire country that Tennessee had something special. By the time he finished his college career, he'd racked up 32 sacks, which stood as a Tennessee record for years. The Volunteers had one of the most dominant defensive linemen in college football, and everyone knew it. But what made White special wasn't just his production, it was his technique. Even in college, White had developed what would become his signature move, the hump move. He'd use his incredible upper body strength to bull rush an offensive tackle. Then, at the perfect moment, he'd dip his shoulder and rip through to the quarterback. Offensive linemen had never seen anything like it. They still talk about it today. White graduated from Tennessee with his degree and left as an All-American with every major program in professional football desperate to get him. But here's where things got interesting. In 1984, there were 2 professional football leagues, the established NFL and the upstart USFL, and Reggie White had a decision to make. The United States Football League was trying to compete with the NFL by throwing money at top college talent, and they wanted Reggie White badly. The Memphis Showboats offered him a contract that the NFL couldn't match at the time, so White made a business decision. He signed with Memphis and entered the USFL in 1984, and he absolutely dominated. In his first season, White recorded 11.5 sacks and showed that he could handle professional competition. Then, in 1985, he was even better, leading the league with 14 sacks. But everyone knew the real question. Could he do it against NFL talent? The USFL was good, but it wasn't the NFL. Some critics dismissed his success as a product of inferior competition. Well, they were about to find out, because after the 1985 season, the USFL folded. The league couldn't sustain itself financially, and suddenly, Reggie White was available. The NFL held a supplemental draft for USFL players, and the Philadelphia Eagles used their pick to grab him. The Minister of Defense was heading to the city of brotherly love, and the NFL was about to learn what Tennessee and the USFL already knew. Reggie White was different. White arrived in Philadelphia for the final 13 games of the 1985 season. He recorded 13 sacks in those 13 games, essentially announcing to the league that he was ready for this level of competition. Combined with his USFL production, White had proven that he could dominate anywhere, against anyone. In 1986, Buddy Ryan took over as head coach of the Eagles and built one of the most fearsome defenses in NFL history. They called it Gang Green, and Reggie White was the centerpiece. Ryan gave White the freedom to attack, to use his combination of power and technique to destroy offensive game plans. And White delivered in ways that even Ryan couldn't have imagined. In 1987, White led the entire NFL with 21 sacks. 21. The league named him first-team All-Pro, and suddenly, everyone was talking about this defensive end from Philadelphia, who played with the power of a freight train and the technique of a surgeon. Then, in 1988, he did it again, recording 18 sacks and earning another All-Pro selection. What made White so dominant was his complete skill set. He could bull rush you with pure power that offensive tackles simply couldn't match. He could beat you with speed off the edge. He could use that signature hump move to slip past your block. And if you somehow managed to slow him down on one play, he'd come back with something different on the next. Offensive coordinators had nightmares about game planning against him. The Eagles made multiple playoff runs during White's time in Philadelphia, championship game, but never quite getting to the Super Bowl. And in 1992, tragedy struck when White's teammate and close friend Jerome Brown died in a car accident. It devastated White and the entire Eagles organization. Brown and White had formed one of the most dominant defensive line duos in football, and suddenly, that partnership was gone. By the end of the 1992 season, White was frustrated. He felt underappreciated by the Eagles organization. Contract negotiations went poorly. The team that he'd given everything to didn't seem willing to pay him what he was worth. And then something happened that would change the NFL forever. Free agency arrived. In 1993, the NFL implemented true free agency for the first time, and Reggie White became the biggest prize on the market. Every team in the league wanted him. The Cleveland Browns offered him more money than anyone. The San Francisco 49ers offered him an immediate chance to win a championship with a loaded roster. But White surprised everyone by choosing the Green Bay Packers, a small market team that hadn't won anything in decades and had a young, unproven quarterback named Brett Favre. When reporters asked him why he chose Green Bay, White gave an answer that shocked people. He said God told him to go to Green Bay. Some people mocked the decision. Others questioned whether he was serious about winning. But White knew exactly what he was doing. He saw something in Green Bay, something in Favre, and he believed he could help build something special. And he was right. In his first season with the Packers in 1993, White recorded 13 sacks and immediately elevated the entire defense. Young players watched how he prepared, how he studied film, how he approached every practice like it mattered. He mentored defensive linemen who'd never had anyone teach them the nuances of pass rushing. He changed the culture of the entire franchise. The Packers made the playoffs in 1993, then again in 1994 and 1995, but they kept falling short. Close, but not close enough. White was getting older. Time was running out. And then everything clicked in 1996. The Packers finished the regular season 13-3 with one of the most dominant teams in football. Favre was playing at an MVP level. The defense, led by White, was absolutely suffocating. And in the playoffs, they steamrolled through the competition. First, they destroyed the San Francisco 49ers in a game that felt like revenge. For all those years, the 49ers had beaten the Packers in the playoffs. Then, they beat the Carolina Panthers to reach Super Bowl 31. The Patriots stood across from them in New Orleans. And for Reggie White, this was his moment. After 12 seasons in professional football, after all the individual accolades and records, he still didn't have a championship ring. The game stayed close through 3 quarters, but in the fourth, White took over. He recorded 3 sacks, including a crucial strip sack that sealed the victory. When the clock hit 0 and the Packers won 35-21, White dropped to his knees on the field and thanked God. At 35 years old, he finally had his ring. The next season, in 1997, the Packers returned to the Super Bowl, this time against John Elway and the Denver Broncos. Green Bay fought hard, but Denver's Terrell Davis ran wild, and the Broncos won 31-24. White played well, but the result stung. Still, he'd proven that his decision to come to Green Bay was the right one. He'd helped transform a franchise and brought them a championship. In 1998, at 37 years old, White had one final dominant season, recording 16 sacks and reminding everyone that Father Time still hadn't caught up to him. But after that season, he decided to retire. His body was breaking down. The wear and tear of 14 professional seasons had taken its toll. It was time to step away and focus on his ministry full-time. Reggie White stayed retired through the entire 1999 season, focusing on preaching and spending time with his family. But in 2000, the Carolina Panthers convinced him to come back for one more season. White was 38 years old, and his body wasn't what it used to be. He recorded 5.5 sacks in 16 games. Still productive, but clearly not the dominant force he'd once been. After that season, he retired for good, this time knowing that he'd given everything he had to the game. The final numbers told an incredible story. 198 career sacks, which stood as the NFL record when he retired. 13 Pro Bowl selections, 13 All-Pro selections, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, a Super Bowl championship, the only player in NFL history to be named All-Pro at 2 different positions, defensive end and defensive tackle. The resume was beyond impressive. It was legendary. After retirement, White dedicated himself fully to his ministry. He traveled the country preaching, doing speaking engagements, and staying involved in his community. He and his wife Sarah remained in the Green Bay area, and White became a beloved figure in Wisconsin. But behind the scenes, White was struggling with sleep apnea, a serious condition that he didn't properly manage. On December 26, 2004, just 4 years after his final NFL game, Reggie White died suddenly at his home. He was only 43 years old. The cause was cardiac arrhythmia related to his sleep apnea. The news shocked the entire sports world. One of the greatest players in NFL history, a man who seemed invincible on the football field, was gone far too soon. The tributes poured in from everywhere. Teammates, opponents, coaches, and fans all shared stories about what Reggie White meant to them. He'd changed 2 franchises, the Eagles and the Packers. He'd revolutionized the pass rushing position. He'd shown that you could be both a dominant athlete and a man of deep faith. And he'd done it all with a humility that made everyone around him better. In 2006, the Pro Football Hall of Fame inducted Reggie White on the first ballot, a posthumous honor that recognized what everyone already knew. He was one of the greatest to ever play the game. Both the Eagles and the Packers retired his number 92, ensuring that no player would ever wear it again for either franchise. So let me bring it all back to the beginning. How good was Reggie White actually? The numbers speak for themselves. 198 sacks, 13 Pro Bowls, 13 All-Pros, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, a Super Bowl ring. But Reggie White was more than just numbers. He was a player who combined raw power with refined technique in a way that nobody had seen before. He could bull rush you through the backfield or speed rush around the edge. He invented pass rushing moves that players still use today. He elevated everyone around him, making good players great and great players even better. He changed what it meant to be a defensive end in the NFL. Before White, teams valued size and strength. After White, they started looking for that combination of power, speed, and technique that made him unstoppable. Pioneered the modern pass rusher, and every dominant defensive end who came after him owes something to Reggie White. But beyond all the football success, White showed that you could be elite at your profession while also being committed to something bigger than yourself. The Minister of Defense wasn't just a clever nickname. It was who he was at his core. He ministered to people off the field and dominated on it. He lived his faith publicly and never apologized for it. And he did it all while being one of the most respected players in league history. Gone too soon at 43, but his legacy lives on in every pass rusher who studies his film, in every defensive coordinator who designs schemes around getting to the quarterback, and in every player who believes they can be great at football, while also being a person of faith and character. When you talk about the greatest defensive players in NFL history, the conversation always includes Reggie White, and it always will. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Reggie White's legendary career, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check out our other videos breaking down the greatest players in NFL history. Because sometimes greatness comes with a nickname that tells you everything you need to know. The Minister of Defense. That's exactly what he was.